This is Heal Your Mind, Heal Your Body with Dr. Schuyler. Discover how your thoughts manifest disease and what you can do about it. Here's your host, Dr. Schuyler.
Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back. I have a former patient here today, Morgan, that is going to springboard off last week's episode with Lily, understanding and unraveling what a disease or illness of the mind-body connection looks like, and how her former physician, Dr. Safter, labeled her healed. Welcome, Morgan. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
So back us into it. You've had a rather remarkable medical journey. If you want to back us a little into what is your diagnosis and when did your medical journey begin?
Yeah, so my medical journey began when I was very young. At 2 years old, I was diagnosed with cancer, specifically leukemia. I was off treatment when I was 5 and cured when I was 10. When I was 10, I started having GI symptoms that went undiagnosed until I was 15. When I was 15, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. That spread throughout my entire colon. When I was 16, it was extremely inflamed. And I managed that for a few years until when I was 21, I had symptoms from head to toe suddenly, like heart, nerve, gut. And when I was 22, I was diagnosed with dysautonomia, autonomic neuropathy, chronic dehydration, cellular damage, chronic fatigue, and adrenal fatigue. So it's been a rough, long journey with my health.
I know. And if you guys could see her, she is this amazing, beautiful human avatar and the sweetest person. And the way she appears would never be indicative of the really, really insanely difficult health journey she's been on. She's just this beacon of ray and sunshine. So what's different about Morgan and the last week's patient's episode, Lily, is Morgan had known medical causes for this. What had she described to me through her physicians, the damage the chemotherapy had done had really caused a lot of damage. So there was actually organic reasons why Morgan was so sick. And what we're going to get into is how the organic reasons became inflamed and exacerbated by the mind-body connection. Morgan, does that sound accurate to you?
Yes, 100%.
So what are some of the treatments that you've tried? And if we separate the cancer journey from the GI journey, and if you start separating that, what treatments did you try? What did you go through? Hospitalizations? Walk us through the journey.
Yeah, so treatments that didn't help, honestly, medication and supplements, which is typically a very common route to treat a chronic illness. However, I went through a whole medical medication trial and error process, and it just made my body so much worse. I was not getting better at all. And same with supplements. I would take a few supplements and be fine, but if I overloaded supplements, my body just could not handle it. So honestly, your mainstream ways of treating it just wasn't working for me. And that was extremely difficult.
Yeah, so the physicians have tried every option, every standard, every gold standard treatment, every medication. You've gotten to the point where you've tried everything. You've done you were in doctor's appointments and testing and clinics, and you all with such faithfulness pursued every single possible option. Just her parents are amazing. They were relentless in getting their child healed. I mean, they were relentless. They were bound and determined to help their child heal.
Yeah.
So she's almost minimizing how many years they went through. Is that accurate?
Yeah. It was a really long time of a lot of struggles. And especially when I was 22, that's when I met you. And that's when my life was at its hardest point. That's when I was diagnosed with 6 more illnesses on top of all the behind the scenes things that were going on, like the ulcerative colitis I was dealing with for years. But then all of a sudden, my health took a really hard hit. And for a while, we had no idea what was going on. And I had to struggle in this realm of not having answers. And it was really scary because I was only getting worse and not getting better. So I went to the top hospitals in the country. I saw really amazing doctors, and thankfully I was finally able to get a diagnosis to start treating it, but it took me a really long time to get there.
So Morgan is a product of Arnold Palmer Hospital for Dr. Safter, where I interviewed her, and that's how I was introduced to her. So when I met you, Morgan, you were very emaciated. I don't know if you're medically malnourished, but it looked like medical malnourishment.
Yeah, I was medically malnourished.
Uh, so if you're describing from a developmental point of view, from a psychologist point of view, and I'm listening to you talk at age 2 up in age 22, those are obviously very primary developmental years. How did that begin to shape who you are as a human?
Yeah, it definitely impacted my entire well-being. So being sick basically became my identity. Like when I would meet someone, I would discuss, like, not right away, but I felt that it was a part of who I was because that's what I was going to like the hospital, I was in the emergency room. When I was 22, I was getting at home IVs every week. I wasn't doing the typical things that a 22-year-old was doing. So when I was talking to people, that's what I could talk about. And so illness became my identity. That's all I knew. And so for my whole life, my world revolved around how I felt and my illnesses and what was going on.
So in a way, your disease became your identity.
Yeah.
And I want to point out, Morgan was an athlete. I'll let you tell that story. But Morgan has her master's degree now, but she was an athlete going to college. Can you tell us a little bit about the recovering overachiever that you are? Because hopefully I've taught you to slow down a little bit.
Yes.
But tell us a little bit about.
Yeah. So before I met Dr. Hamilton, I was definitely A plus plus overachiever. When I went to college, I went on a scholarship. I was rowing Division 1, getting up at 5 a.m. every day to work out 3 times a day. I had a double major in education and psychology. And so, yeah, I pushed the heck out of myself.
And that's what I want to point out to parents out there. And again, Morgan is like Lily and hundreds of pediatrics, two very supportive parents, an overachiever, great grades, great community, great friends. And you're starting to see this pattern form when people are like, why my child? Why my child? My child was everything. They're so successful. And this is where we're really starting to get into, well, for Morgan, it's getting into this disease started to become her identity. And then we start shifting into something we'll get into later called secondary gains. But this is when you're really starting to piece together the mind body connection when you've got this stress, this internal need to people please, this drive to be really good at what you're doing. So when I met you, you're 22. And I know that Dr. Safter had recommended, but what for you made you think, okay, I want to explore the mind body connection? There may be something to this.
Yeah. So when I went to see Dr. Softer, one appointment, I talked to her and I was like, hey, I'm having a really hard time with the mental load that this is having on me. Like, it's not just all the physical. And we were in the process of, trying different things to see what could work. And I was like, even though I was getting more diagnosis at the time, I knew deep down that there was more to what was going on, that I could heal myself. Like, there was just this knowing inside that I was like, okay, even though things are getting worse, like, there has to be another answer. There has to be a way that my body should be able to heal itself. Like, why am I just getting sicker? So I think it was just this internal curiosity of like, why am I so disconnected and how can I reconnect?
Oh, I love that. And that's something that's such an advocate that I tell people as you're beginning to explore your automatic negative thoughts. And 80% of our thoughts are automatically negative. And Morgan, exactly what you did. You start watching and observing your thoughts with curiosity, like, wait, why can't I be better? Why can't I be better? So you've learned a lot over the last few years, and we've gone over different coping tools, different mechanisms. And for you, what was the major turning point in your life? Like, what stands out to you that you had the darkest moment of time and something you shifted and decided that you could feel or create wellness? What was the darkness like? And then what was the shift like?
So I remember my rock bottom moment in my healing journey. It was at night. I was in so much GI pain, discomfort, constipation for days. I was extremely malnourished. I wanted to go take a bath. And I was at the point where I couldn't physically lift myself in and out of the bath. I had to have my family members help me get in and out. that's how sick I was at this point. And I just remember sitting there and praying for an extremely long time. And I was like, I'm done being sick. I can't keep living like this. This is so hard. And like, I just, I knew that there had to be another way. So I said to God, I'm done being sick. I am done living like this. And I was crying and I was just sitting there and I was like, I know there are ways out there to heal. Please guide me to those, even just a glimpse of hope, anything. Just like I really need healing right now. And before I stepped into the bath, I was talking to my parents about how I still haven't heard back from one of the top hospitals that I was trying to get into in order to have answers and to get a diagnosis for what was going on. And when I stepped out of the bath, my mom said there was a message on my portal, and I got in and I had an appointment the next week. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm going to be okay. And that was like my moment of like, God, I will do whatever it takes. Like, just guide me, give me something here to help me understand what I need to do.
So you had this moment of glimmer and hope. You had a decision, I'm done, which is something that I always tell people, healing is a decision when in cases like this.
Mhm.
So you had the decision, I'm done, and then you had this glimmer of hope.
Mhm.
When did you begin to start feeling a shift from the depths of all those symptoms that you started to feel better? What did you notice started to work for you?
I think switching my thoughts seemed to work for me most effectively at first because I was living in negativity. Like, you explained how many thoughts we have a day. And for me, it was like almost every single one of them was negative and was around illness. So when I started, like, the first thing that was so beneficial for me was changing my thoughts the moment I wake up and asking myself, like, what gratitudes am I going to feel today? And like, what amazing flavors am I going to taste? Because at the time I had such a low appetite. So I would ask myself questions like that. And that really helped me start living differently.
Oh my gosh, I remember that. I remember that part. It was, you were so excited to eat like spicy or flavored foods.
Yes.
That was a really big deal, actually. It was a really big deal.
It really was. I started gaining a bigger appetite from that. And then I was able to gain weight back and I was no longer medically malnourished. And I no longer was, my doctor at the time wanted to put me on a feeding tube. I no longer needed that. So yeah, little things like that made such a big difference. And I started seeing the difference immediately.
So, what I want to point out here is that we talked about ants. I talk about ants so much, automatic negative thoughts. And we have, roughly 60,000 thoughts a day. 80% of those are negative. We repeat our thoughts 95% of the time. Whatever you're going to think tomorrow, you thought yesterday and the day before. So, what Morgan did, she made the decision, I'm done. She had a glimmer of hope. And then she started working in conjunction with a brilliant medical teams.
Mhm.
She started analyzing and being objectively curious about her thoughts without any judgment. Is that correct? Like, you had no judgment for how bad they were.
Correct. Yeah.
So you also did something else we talked about, and I want to kind of convey this to the audience. You started to become a student of your thoughts. You started watching your thoughts, monitoring your thoughts with this objective curiosity, and then you became a master of your thoughts. And I like to describe the shift of you're a student when you're observing them, and without judgment, you're just observing them. Well, that's an interesting thought. And you become a master when you begin to implement automatic loving thoughts, which is what you started to do. You removed the old and started imprinting automatic loving thoughts. And I love how you did the question in the morning. And that question that she did in the morning, it activates something called the reticular activating system. So her brain spent the entire day solving that equation. What if? What if I have great food? What if my day is great? So not only did she make the decision to do this, she had sheer determination. Like, nothing was going to stop her. She had the will, she had the hope, determination, but then she did her homework. And I recall you treated this like a full-time job.
Yeah, absolutely. I knew that if I wanted to live a different life, which would be healthy, happy, that I had to do whatever it took. And I was willing to do whatever it took.
So, and this is where I was gonna thank you, that's a great segue that I'm gonna take. Thank you for that segue, because I'm gonna talk about what I kinda call the underbelly of healing, the dark side of healing, secondary gains, and I am very comfortable talking about secondary gains 'cause the world needs to understand. So, I really wanna applaud you for having the courage to join me on this journey as we kind of forge our way. We talked about thoughts, and we're gonna make the transition into when did you begin to realize that you were having secondary gains, and how would you describe secondary gains?
I I think it was a few months into healing is when I realized I had secondary gains, and I think it came a bit later because I was also it was so hard to accept because it is a dark side of you, and so I was like a bit embarrassed to realize wow, like that is really what's going on. Like I am gaining something else from being sick, from, having symptoms. Like there is something like more to this. So, yeah, it definitely like at first took me some time to have that understanding and like that total acceptance for it and self-love. And then once I felt that, I felt relieved because I felt the authenticity of just like being me. Like it felt like, okay, it just like that is what it is. This is me and I'm no longer hiding any part of me. And so to have both like the light and the dark along the journey is so important. So that's definitely where I was able to come to and I'm so grateful for that.
So y'all can't see me, but I'm actually a little teared up, and it might come up in the voice because that is just the most beautiful thing any human can say to me when I've seen some of the darkest hour, and then they say something like, "I found my authentic self," and I admitted, so courageously I had secondary gains, and I experienced self-love, I experienced authenticity. I can't explain to people how hard that is to come to reconcile with and to say that to the world. To reach that place when you are so healed and you're so comfortable with the dark side of healing, and to hear Morgan say that, it's just very personally touching for me because that's all we could ever ask for any human, is to reach that place in their life when they experience self-love and authenticity. I don't think there's a higher plane you can be on as a human. I just well done. That took me off guard. I need a secondary to recoup from that one. So back into a clinical mindset here, Dr. Schuyler. You're saying you step into your authentic self, and when did you realize that you're no longer your disease?
When I started putting in the work to figure out who I was without my illnesses. And that was so helpful when you started asking me questions that guided me to figure out who I was. Because I know that sounds crazy to say because I was in my 20s when I figured it out, but I did not know because I was so lost in being sick for so long. I truly didn't know what my heart desired and how to go after that. And so once I figured out like who I was and like what I really wanted and what I was passionate about and what lit that fire up inside of me, that's when I really was able to like, I don't know, accept myself fully.
Yeah. So this is I'm kind of recapping the journey.
Mhm,
You have a defined moment of, "I'm done." I had the exact same moment of just when you're done. You know when you know when you know you're done. You started monitoring your automatic negative thoughts.
mhm,
Then you started shifting them to automatic loving thoughts. You started identifying who you are as a human, stepped into your authentic self,
yeah.
started to fall in love with yourself, started to create who you are. So, who you are right now is this ideal future version of you that we actually worked on years ago. Who is your ideal future version of you? And if Morgan, if you take a Polaroid snapshot of your life in this precise moment, your ideal, authentic, present self, what would you whisper to yourself in your darkest hour?
I would tell myself that one, it's going to be temporary. And I know I was saying that, and you were saying that also during my journey. But now being able to look back, it really was so temporary compared to like the bigger picture here. And the second part, and also I couldn't see that when I was struggling because, day after day of being sick, you're kind of like temporary? Like, what do you mean? But now I see it and now I get it much more than I did then. I trusted it then and I was like, okay, we're gonna get through it. It's temporary. But now it's like it was so much more temporary than I realized then. And the second one, I would say you have the healing power within you already. And once you learn how to use that, like your life will be even better than you could ever imagine.
Wow. And she's not wrong, people. And it's that defining moment, that glimmer of hope, that determination, that's the antidote. And just being totally courageous and vulnerable to admit secondary gains and automatic negative thoughts. And it's that stepping into actually how I clinically was is we use neurotheology for the evidence-based approach on this one. And what Morgan's talking about actually is a very advanced concept that I do later on in the treatments. And it is something called neurotheology, when you begin to bring someone's faith, whatever the faith may be, into their treatment plan. And for Morgan, what she's talking about is stepping into this unknown. And how I like to describe it is when you are sick, you have one finite outcome. You know what the outcome is, and you think that's the finite outcome, and that's how it's always going to be. But when you release that finite determination, that finite outcome, and you decide, I want to be better, you just step into infinite potential. And for Morgan, we use this faith-based approach, this neurotheological approach, to really dive into authentic self, dive into her inner divinity. Authentic self is the bridge to inner divinity, I always say. So Morgan is the epitome of the example of a patient that's gone, she had faith going into this, but had used this thread of faith throughout the entire process. And then to come this culmination to be in this empowered, literally empowered sense of self years later, living her authentic self and finding that purpose. And it's what I call, it's like the third phase of the treatment that I do. And if more people could understand connecting to your authentic self and using your faith or using your belief system, it just, in short, kind of works miracles. And I've seen it one too many times that I can unequivocally say that. And I think you would agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what are you up to now, young lady?
So, after this whole journey and being extremely inspired by you and all of the work that you've done, I mean, Dr. Hamilton completely changed my life. I have to go there. Like,
I'm blushing, just for the record, I'm blushing.
yeah, she really did. My life changed after meeting her, and the work is just absolutely incredible. While I was sick, I got my master's in educational psychology. And so now I am coaching others through chronic illnesses using all the tools that I learned. And I am a neuro linguistic programming practitioner. So, yeah, I couldn't imagine doing anything else at this point.
Yeah, and y'all, she is remarkable. And neurolinguistics, and that's also part of it, using the power of the language. That's a whole separate podcast, but I would briefly highlight on what NLP is for people and how brilliant it is. The use of the language, like, I'm so sick, I have a disease. If someone says, I'm going to take your car, I'm going to take your dog, I'm going to take your house, you're going to fight for it and say, no, don't take my dog, don't take my car. The power of the words that you use, my disease, my anxiety, we claim it and then we begin to fight for it. So one of the things that Morgan did was start to rechange her verbiage. I was diagnosed with something. I was diagnosed with this. We worked on not saying I have anxiety, or it's more of I'm experiencing symptoms right now of my thoughts. So what Morgan became a practitioner in is literally breaking down the science of the language that we use and how that impacts the mind-body connection. And it's a brilliant approach that I firmly believe in. And Morgan is now a mind-body coach herself with a master's degree. I'm just so proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
So proud of you. Morgan, thank you so much for coming and having the courage and the vulnerability to just lay it all out. And hopefully this inspired a lot of people.
It is my pleasure. I hope the same.
Okay, so you can actually find out more about Morgan from drschuyler.net under team. Morgan has been, after her treatment with me, has been personally trained on how to be a somatic coach. So you can find out more about her on there, and then More Warriors as well, correct?
Yes. More Warriors Life Coach.
Yes. You can find more information on drskylar.net. There's information on there about my upcoming book, Empower Your Child to Heal, and what we've talked about with Morgan and even Lily before, and even Dr. Safter, or secondary gains, attachment style, automatic negative thoughts. All that's going to be in the book. It's coming out in fall. If you click on the link in there, you'll get free downloads and even actually a sneak peek in the book. It's called Healing Phases, and it's actually almost the entire chapter that's going to be in the free download. I'm finally on Instagram and all that other stuff. So you can find me on Instagram with Dr. Skylar _, and it's same as Facebook and TikTok, Dr. Skylar _. I do have an online workshop coming up on Mind Body Connection, and it's Why My Body's Betraying Me. Also have a retreat coming out this fall, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week. And thank you for listening, beautiful souls. Thank you for your time. I feel so grateful you have listened to the end. When we begin to understand how our body manifests stress, trauma, depression, anxiety, and even unexpressed emotions, we then create a space, a bandwidth in our minds to begin to heal our bodies. Healing is a decision, and I am grateful for yours. Abundant blessings, Dr. Skylar.
To learn more about the work Dr. Skylar is doing, please visit drskylar.net. That's drskyler.net. And remember to subscribe to this podcast wherever you like to listen.
Produced by Audavita Studios. Connect your voice to the world.